to call the July meeting of the Saanich Peninsula Accessibility Advisory Committee to order. I'd like to start off by acknowledging that today we gather on the traditional lands of the Tsawat, Tsartlip, Pakwachin, Sakem, and Malahat nations, who've nurtured and protected these lands for generations. Oh, come on in. We pay respect to their elders, past and present, and acknowledge the historical injustices faced by Indigenous communities. Let us approach this meeting with humility, seeking to learn from their wisdom, and may we cultivate a space of understanding, empathy, and mutual respect. As guests on their territories, we commit to honoring Indigenous rights and working towards a future of unity and respect for all community members. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda today is the election of chair and vice chair. And so I guess I will start by entertaining nominations for the chair position. Councillor O'Keefe.
I'll make a recommendation that the current appointments of the chair and vice chair be extended to December 31st, 2023.
Seconded. I'm sorry, it's Darlene, right? Dale, sorry. Okay.
And the reason for that is most of our councils, we make our appointments at a certain time of year, usually December, right?
Yeah, so it's for the start of the new year.
Yeah, so for the start of the new year. So it's just, because this committee kind of got started mid-cycle. If we just extend these appointments to the end of the year, then we kind of can be in line with the calendar year.
Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, Charlene, are you willing to stand for the next term?
Unless somebody else really wants it, yeah.
Okay, I'm willing to stand. Are there any other nominations? In that case, I'll call the question. All in favor of continuing the current appointments? Yeah. Any opposed? Seeing none opposed, motion carried. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the vote of confidence from all you folks. Thank you. Next item is the approval of the agenda. Councillor O'Keefe.
I was, in regards to the agenda, wondering whether we might want to add in introductions, perhaps, because we're starting with Sidney and some Sidney staff here, and for anybody that's new, there's some people who haven't been to a meeting before, so.
And I'll speak to that as well. Usually we at least do a roll call just so that Vanessa can refresh herself with everyone's voices so she can have an indication of who's speaking.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other amendments to the agenda? Do I have a seconder for, do I need a seconder for that? Okay, Mr. Ryder, all in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, carried unanimously. Okay. And so we'll put that in as number 5, new number 5. Next item. Sure. Okay. So we'll next do a brief introductions. My name's David. I'll start here. We'll go around the table in a clockwise manner. My name is David Willows. I am the current chair of the Saanich Peninsula Accessibility Advisory Committee. I'm also the Central Saanich Community Representative. My job in this committee is I've got a 9-year-old son who has cerebral palsy and significantly disabled. So I've been an advocate in accessibility now for a number of years. My focus has been on standards development and infrastructure, but it's been branching out since I've gotten to know the different members of this committee and understanding their needs in that better. Thank you.
David Ryder, Town of Sidney representative, and I guess representing the cognitive aspect of the committee.
Jennifer Van Ness. I am the director of Shoal Center and Senior Services, so I represent the older adults.
And Terry O'Keefe, councillor for Town of Sidney and the Sidney Council Liaison.
Are we going that way?
Yeah, we'll start. Anna?
Okay, and I'm recommending this is just the.
Hi there, I'm Richard Roy. I'm the Town of Sidney, staff liaison. Morning, everyone. I'm Randy Humble. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer. Here.
Good morning, I'm Cliff McNeil Smith, Town of Sidney Mayor. Pleased to join you this morning. Good morning, I'm Trevor Parks. I'm the senior planner for the District of North Saanich, and I'm the staff liaison to the committee.
Good morning, I'm Emily Gorman. I'm the Director of Corporate Services and Staff Liaison from the District of Central Saanich. And I do want to update consultants are on the way. It accidentally went to the wrong fire hall. So.
I'm Dale Simon. I'm the citizen representative from Sidney, and I'm hearing impaired and represent that part of the world.
Good morning, everyone. Gord Newton, councillor with the District of Central Saanich.
Good morning, I'm Lee York. I'm a citizen representative from Sidney.
Morning, Charlene Froome, citizen representative from North Saanich, and I come to this with 40 years of living a disabled life. So I bring a lot of lived experience to the committee.
I'm Vanessa Pettinger. I'm a citizen of Sidney. I'm completely blind and have been for 6 years, so I'm learning as we go. And yeah.
Morning, everyone. Catherine Beck, Manager of Program Services with Panorama Recreation, here on behalf of Panorama Recreation, representing Lorraine Munster.
Thank you, everyone. Next, we'll move on to,
Was there, do we have any people online?
do we have, I didn't say any, no?
Okay.
Okay, perfect. That makes things a lot easier. So approval of the minutes. Any amendments to the minutes, or can I get a motion to approve the minutes as provided?
I move approval of the minutes as provided.
Moved by member Lee,
I'll second.
seconded by member Froome. All in favor? Any opposed? All right, carried unanimously. I think we'll bypass number 6 now because that's the accessibility plan and the team's not here yet. So we'll go to item 7, council referrals. And we have Sidney proposed changes to the BC building code.
So yeah, so this is mine, and just reporting back on this. So you may recall at I believe it was our last meeting, we made a recommendation back to our councils about relating to the BC building code. And when I brought that forward, it was felt that there was more clarity needed. So for example, town staff are required to abide by the BC building code and everything that's in it. And so for us to make a motion to staff to say, pay attention to the BC building code, didn't seem appropriate because it's something they do anyways. So if there was something that was specific that SPAAC members felt that is in the BC building code that we were missing, then, we could perhaps make a recommendation on that. So it's just bringing it back to the committee to see if there was any further clarification. Otherwise, we would just leave it as it is, knowing that town staff will certainly address any changes that are in the BC building code.
Thank you. And Lee.
I think the issue of interest, as I recall, was the new accessibility standards proposed. But they just went out for public input, I think, until middle of June, and aren't actually expected to be part of the BC building code till later this year, I believe. So it's probably a bit premature. And I certainly take your point that Sidney staff, of course, are immersed in the building code and need to be in. So we don't need to be too specific yet, I don't think. But one perspective of mine is once the building code is actually enacted and part of law, I'm hoping there'll be more flexibility in it so that the individual municipalities can perhaps enforce some things on existing buildings through their licensing and development and permitting processes.
Thank you. Anyone else? I'll just speak briefly on it as well. And this is just background information that the building code is a bare minimum standard when it comes to accessibility. And our building inspectors do a great job there, but their focus is on structural elements when it comes to the building code. So sometimes the details in accessibility, like there's a requirement that changed in the last update to have an upper and a lower button or use a bar for the automatic door openers. And things like that sometimes get missed, and it's no fault of the building inspectors. There's a huge volume of material for them. But it's attention to some of those details that we might find isn't always there, because they are focused on the structural and fire safety of buildings. But also, just for people to keep in mind that the building code is a bare minimum standard. Having been through a code update process, that was absolutely clear. We had another code change requests rejected for that reason. So, but other than that, I guess table the issue till.
Well, I don't think it's tabled. It's just, sort of reporting back
Okay.
to say that, because the committee asked council liaisons to bring this forward. And so I'm just reporting back on sort of the response from Town of Sidney in regards to that. So if in the future, once those changes get made, and if there's things that this committee finds that are shortcomings or things that think should exceed that minimum standard, then maybe at that point there might be some specific recommendations.
And it is an unrestricted item under the BC Building Act. So there is some flexibility for local governments to add requirements on top of that, like Sydney's done with some of the accessible and adaptable housing requirements. Hey, next we've got council updates. So that's the tracking sheet. I hope it printed it all up here. Might have only got half of it because it was oriented landscape on the pages. So first item. Oh, actually, I can look on Dave's here as well. Oh, okay, I got it. Feedback mechanism that the Saanich Peninsula Accessibility Advisory Committee recommends that each municipality, SPAAC, Central Saanich, Sidney, and North Saanich have a process in place to let individuals know how to direct concerns about accessibility issues in the community. And that staff report back to council once the accessibility. Okay, so that's the first item.
So
yeah,
if I may, Chair,
Yeah.
so the tracking sheet is really for the committee's information.
Oh, okay.
It's there simply. It was put together by she put it together really for the committee's information in terms of making it clear in terms of what each council is doing with respect to the recommendations that are made by the committee. So it's an opportunity for the committee just to be aware of what the council motions are coming out of the committee recommendations. So pure information only, and I anticipate it'll be a reoccurring item on the agenda.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for clarifying that, Mr. Humble. In that case, do we need a motion? Oh, Councilor O'Keefe?
no, I was just going to say, when I was talking to Ms. Nelson on this, I think one of the other bits of value with this is that we've talked before about being able to capture what are the issues that come up at SPAAC and how they're dealt with. So I think Andy's done a good job. She went through, I think, all of our minutes from the beginning to put this together. So it's just sort of a rolling report on what's been done. And I think it's also good for the council liaisons to be reminding us to be bringing back and reporting back to this committee in terms of how the recommendations were dealt with at the council level. So I think it's good for that purpose as well.
Thank you, Councilor O'Keefe. Councilor Newton.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to express my gratitude for the staff at the Town of Sidney and other staff members that were involved in this to put this together. It does really help. I know this committee had talked about sort of how to close the loop on some of these items, and so appreciate the work that was done on this. I guess the comment I have is this something, we get something similar for other committees in Central Saanich? Is this something that needs to be done monthly, or is this something that could be done quarterly, just to try and be cognizant and respectful of the time involved in staff to put this together? So I'm sort of, I guess I put that to the committee and see what they're.
And if I can, through the chair, I think,
Mr. Humble, go ahead.
I think the intent is that this would be done on a regular basis. So as recommendations flow through to the respective councils and they make their way to the councils, and we have motions from council, resolutions from council, it would be updated. It'll come back to each respective meetings.
Sure, great, thank you.
Mr. Ryder.
This raised a question in my mind. I was just reading this and I agree with the appreciation of this document because it's a very formal way and a great way of being updated and seeing where things stand. The question I have, I guess, is a clarification with respect to items that go to the various councils and the response is that it's really not within their jurisdiction to action. That it may have a reference to a federal department or whatever it is. But I'm wondering from our mandate, is there a missing piece of the puzzle in terms of giving approval or authorization to the councils to actually take action on some of these things or give consideration to some get support to go forward if it's an actionable item? Other than, yeah, because I can see blanks coming through on similar items where we made a recommendation and one of the jurisdictions may not be actioning it from a council perspective because it's going to be part of a federal ministry. So does that leave a blank in terms of our flow of information? If ever there was a document or a requirement or a recommendation we felt very strongly about that all three should consider, I'm just wondering if it's
So just
clarification.
So just to clarify, say something like the Taxi Saver program. Yeah, that was outside the scope of the municipal's area of responsibility. But if it was something we felt particularly passionate about, we could then put forward a motion that requesting that council send a letter to BC Transit outlining our concerns or something like that. Is that the type of thing that you're looking for?
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether there's a clarification needed or a mechanism to be put in place that gives authority of some sort to the council to be able to put some action informally, just to assist. They felt strongly about it.
Councillor O'Keefe?
I think, and I'll look to my council colleague and maybe to staff on this as well, but if, council always has the opportunity to, whether it's to send a letter to BC Transit or to a higher authority, if they think it's going to have some impact. So I think that option is available if councils, choose to exercise that.
Councillor Newton and then Mr. Humble.
Sure, I would sort of echo Councillor O'Keefe's comment that given that this committee sort of represents multiple local governments, I'm not sure how, and again, trying to be cognizant of staff's time and effort and energy, but if there was something that was beyond the scope of local governments, which is what this committee sort of focuses on, to have recommendation come from all three local governments, it may have a little bit more weight. And again, try to minimize the duplication of work that's being done across Sidney, North Saanich, and Central Saanich. So again, as we're working through this, and this is a new, still a reasonably new committee, we're still trying to figure out where and how all of the things fit together. But I think the benefit is that we do have a bit of a stronger voice with having three municipalities. So if there's a concern that we wish advocacy on from this committee, to have it go to the various local governments, and then they can continue and push that forward to the various levels of government sort of after the fact on that, would be what I kind of see how that would work.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Mr. Humble?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, yeah, I think these are the complexities associated with the sort of a tri-municipal type of committee, and this is somewhat unique. It's certainly unique for the Peninsula in terms of the format. So there's definitely some feeling our way, as we move forward. But ultimately, I think that at a staff level in our respective municipalities, we would try to, when recommendations are coming forward to our respective councils, speak with the council liaisons and potentially red flag any potential issues around jurisdictional authority and these kinds of things, right? But and try to raise those in advance. It's important to note that this is a committee that makes recommendations to our respective councils, and you've got three different municipalities, three separate councils. And council can make those decisions around moving forward, resolving to proceed with a recommendation or not. And because you're dealing with individual councils, there may be times where you have different perspectives and different approaches on particular items. And that's just the nature of this type of format.
Thank you. Councillor Keefe, did you have your hand up?
Oh, no.
No, okay, and then
Yeah.
Councillor Newton.
Sure, thank you. Briefly in that, and I think that that's probably where having staff's input at the committee level would be really helpful and beneficial so that we don't get too bogged down in the weeds about areas that probably isn't where we should be sticking our nose. And provide us with a little bit more guidance, much like, you know, this Central Saanich's comment about the building code and Sidney's comment about the building code, that just some feedback from staff could provide us with a bit more guidance to, and again, as we're still navigating the way through all of this. So appreciate it.
Councillor Keefe?
And thank you. And I think to Councillor Newton's point, I think the new format that we have with the agenda, I think where all items are going to be in advance will give staff the opportunity so that if they see taxi savers on the agenda, you know, for example, they will be able to come to the meeting prepared to give us that kind of guidance, having had the time to do that research and preparation in advance. So, thanks.
Thank you. Vice Chair Froome.
I just want to add my thanks too. When I read this, I went through the agenda and read this and saw the work that Sandy put into this. I thought she must have been doing this as we were going along and we didn't know about it, because that's a lot of work. Just keeping in mind with knowing where the weeds are and different jurisdictions, that some of us members on the committee are local and we don't understand necessarily how government always works. So some of the things we may bring forward, it's a huge learning curve for some of us as well. So I just really appreciate all this. Helps a lot. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we need a motion to receive or anything like that? Got a motion to you, Anna? No, or no, okay. In that case, any further discussion on this item? Okay. I see our consultants have arrived. Are you guys ready to go?
Town tour.
It's good to check them all out. Absolutely.
PowerPoint slides to Sandy to present. So I don't know if they're going to be done on that device or whether they'll pop up, but when
if
pop up.
If you guys are ready to go, we can come back to that item. If you need another few minutes, we can come back to it later. It's whatever works for you.
We can start speaking to, I know who I am and why I'm here. So I can start that one. So is there a place you prefer us to stand for better clarity or access?
We don't have anyone online, so yeah. So whatever the committee likes, I'm.
Sure. I mean, we're happy to stand at that end too.
So, are the slides going to be
They'll be up there just a moment.
up there?
It'll be up here.
So yeah, maybe up by the slides, so we're all sort of facing the same direction.
I think I'll go down the end there.
Yeah.
So my name is Haley and I'm a representative of Left Turn, Right Turn. We're an accessibility consulting firm based in Toronto, Ontario, but we've served companies and entities all over Canada. I'm joined by my colleague Kayla Hunt, who is an accessibility specialist along with me. We've been working with municipal staff in the 3 municipalities represented here today over the past couple of months to learn about what's going on in the town, what kind of accessibility work has occurred so far, where the arrows are kind of pointing in terms of priorities for future accessibility planning. And we are in town right now to actually speak with community members to learn about what their challenges are, what features of the towns they appreciate, other aspects that they'd like to see improved with regard to accessibility. I think it's important for everybody here today that I have bipolar disorder, so I live with a disability. Kayla is neurodivergent, and the majority of the staff at our consulting firm live with disabilities as well, sensory disabilities, physical disabilities, and such. My husband is also a profoundly deaf sign language user, and my daughter is autistic. So where I'm speaking today is really not so much as a representative of a consulting firm, but a representative of a rich community of people who have needs. And we want to help your towns meet the needs of people with disabilities. So that's a little bit about the background there. But in terms of our professional work, we have been hired to help the 3 municipalities prepare individual accessibility plans according to Accessible British Columbia Act legislation. So unfortunately, the legislation, like many things that are new, doesn't have as strong of a framework as we would like to be able to give definitive recommendation. Well, I should say not give definitive recommendations, but definitive standards to each of the municipalities to put in their plans. Those are forthcoming. The provincial ministries will come together and determine certain building standards beyond just building code, for example, but those don't exist yet. And so that's where your feedback, our lived experience and expertise, and the knowledge of municipal staff will really help us to determine, without those concrete standards, what might we like to see in an accessibility plan to suit the town's needs, the individual town's needs. So kind of in hearing the initial comments in this meeting, I think this is a really good forum to talk about what we plan to do with the accessibility plans. So there are 3 different municipalities whose needs and interests need to be represented. On the other hand, as we learned this morning, the towns do blend, and I'm sure you all spend your time in all 3 municipalities in different ways at different times, visiting family, frequenting businesses, going to work. And so with that in mind, the reason that the 3 municipalities decided to come together on this project work was they wanted to have kind of an alignment in strategic vision when it comes to accessibility commitments, and then with tweaks and specifications in their plans to appeal to the actual, infrastructure and layout and whatnot of the 3 towns that are represented. So that's kind of, who we are and what we're doing. So I can just, if you want to advance ahead, we've gone through introductions. You can go ahead to the next slide, would be great, thank you. So not joining us today is our principal at Left Turn Right Turn, Kara Wilkie. She is traveling right now, but she has members of her family that live with disabilities, and she is an accessibility rights lawyer and specialist. So she brings that framework, kind of the legal perspective. So she really helps us determine how we read the legislation to make sure that your accessibility plans are legally compliant according to the provincial legislation, while at the same time making the most of them, because we think that the legislation is the floor, it's not the ceiling. And so that's where we have to start, and then we like to elevate it from there, of course, being mindful of timelines and resources. Next slide would be great. So the project overview I've spoken to a little bit, but I'll just reiterate. We are looking to develop 3 accessibility plans that first and foremost reflect the needs and priorities of community members. So accessibility for who? Well, the people who travel the sidewalks and enter the buildings and use the services and spaces. We also want to be sure that we're specific to each municipality while also informing one another to have a cohesive approach. Even the Accessibility Advisory Committee today is made up of members from all 3 municipalities. And so it just makes sense to have conversations that are unified. We want to meet the BC Act obligations, but as I said, absent of concrete standards about what is required in the legislation for accessibility beyond publishing an accessibility plan, we want to incorporate what we know to be best practices as professionals, as well as practical elements that align with your needs as a community. And then finally, we want to provide a pragmatic and principled approach to improve accessibility. And so here's where I would pause and say, although Kayla and I are a little bit obnoxious about accessibility, quite frankly, and we would have probably much more robust plans than is realistic to action right now, we do want to give you an idea of the scale and scope of these accessibility plans. So they do have a lifespan of 3 years. They are required to be updated triannually, and progress reports are part of the process, which means that we feel at this time the most realistic and capacity building accessibility plans would actually point to kind of systemic issues with, as you were discussing today, I heard the tail end of the taxi conversation. We heard feedback from community members yesterday when we were doing public engagement about our understanding is that there's like a voucher system that is accepted by some taxis for public transit. Is this kind of the issue there? Okay, so that was what we heard about yesterday. So for example, figuring out, okay, well, the taxis aren't controlled by the municipality. So what role might the municipality have in that? And if they can't assist in that particular area, what need could they assist with that aligns with some of the feedback we've heard about transit? So, which is to say that I think the strongest recommendations we can make now is to make sure that the there are, point persons on staff who are committed to accessibility, that there is a clear outline of processes. So if this or that item isn't accessible, who do I speak to? And when I speak to them, are they going to speak the language of accessibility and know which vendors to contract, for example, to build accessible playground structure? We know we had success recently in North Saanich with one of your playgrounds, and so on and so forth. And so I think the focus of today's discussion, to be most constructive, would really look at what are the areas of priority rather than very specific elements. So I'm sure that there are buildings that are inaccessible, but unfortunately, at this juncture of the plan, it wouldn't make sense to say, fix this sidewalk. Like this specific sidewalk and intersection is one of the commitments, but to say, establish a procedure for regular sidewalk maintenance that includes accessibility, and then have the mechanisms then to follow through with that. That's kind of the level we're talking about right now. I think the other element that's really helpful with that is once the provincial standards are published, then it means your municipalities will be ready to action those standards, because instead of attending to individual action items, they have actually built the framework to implement greater accessibility. And so that's where we say a pragmatic and principled approach. We want the work that happens now to pay dividends long term, rather than to be short-sighted and just pick off, kind of cherry pick items off the list, if that makes sense. So your role in accessibility planning is crucial. One of the things that you may not remember that you're involved in with respect to this work is that we learned from you what some of the areas of priority were in terms of employment with the municipalities and accessing services and emergency services. So those are the areas that we've been investigating most heavily in terms of requesting documents, talking to subject matter experts on staff, and in talking to the community and asking for feedback around those areas. So you have already kind of established the compass for us to know what to look into when we're doing a current state assessment. And we may be the accessibility experts, so-called, with our lived experience and professional experience, but you are the community members, and so you're experts on your community. So we hope that you can help us make recommendations around effective and strategic consultations with the public. So that may be something you want to chime in today about. We've done one pop-up engagement just yesterday in the town of Sidney, and we have 3 more coming up over the course of the week. So you may say, hey, this is a bear you want to poke. Talk about this, bring this up as you're talking to community members, because that's where you'll get the richest feedback. So areas of focus, frame the questions, and you may even have insight. Thank you very much for those of you who completed the survey that we sent out for your own individual feedback, but we also have a community survey. And so if you have ideas of organizations or people that we should be circulating that with to get deeper feedback, we welcome that. And then when it comes time to, you'll be reviewing and providing feedback on the draft accessibility plans. And again, I think, it may be helpful for municipal staff to speak to a little bit more how they see that relationship going, because at that point we'll pass off our recommendations and it'll be time for you to review. But I think when reviewing it again, think about what would foster capacity building and long-term sustainability for accessibility. I know we all will probably feel frustrated and disappointed that certain sort of pet projects, so-called, don't necessarily make it into the plans, but it's more than likely not feasible or realistic. So just giving you that heads up. So that's how we see your role so far. And of course, then continuing to, as these plans take effect, provide your feedback about how that work is going, and maybe feedback about how you think that work could be done better. Slide. So next steps in the consultation process, we completed the first of 4 pop-up engagements yesterday. Later this afternoon, we're going to be collaborating with the Age-Friendly Cities team on an open house. So we know there's a lot of alignment between the needs of aging persons and people with disabilities, as disabilities are acquired. And so we thought that would be a great population to connect with. We'll be doing another engagement in Centennial Park tomorrow. So that may give us, a younger demographic. We also know that, the needs of people with disabilities often align with the needs of parents as well. I mean, just think about wheeled devices such as strollers. And of course, young people are equipped with disabilities as well. And finally, at the North Saanich Farm Market. So we're going to speak to each of the municipalities in kind of a key location where we know there's lots of foot traffic, and hopefully we get a good cross-section of insight. The public survey has been distributed. We are already obtaining feedback from that. But again, if you have insights about who else you might be able to send that directly to, we appreciate it. And then probably, do we have a timeline for when we expect to circulate the draft plans with the community?
I was gonna ask you.
Yeah. So I think because we're going to be presented to council in mid-October. So I'm thinking the circulation of draft plans like mid-September is probably where so we're not going to give you a number. Let's just leave it loose. But mid-September is probably when that process would take place. So next slide would be great. And so this is the most important part of meeting with you today is we actually want to hear from you. You are certainly welcome to ask questions about the procedure, who we are, what's going on, but more important than that, I would rather hear from you how this aligns with your vision and the work that you continue to do. We know this committee is newly formed, and even just from the brief comments that we were able to hear this morning, it sounds like there's a lot of sensitivity among the group of, hey, we're all just learning to figure this out. So how can we do it best? So with that, I will turn the floor over. Kayla, I don't know if you want to stay seated or come on up here, chime in. Kayla's a smart cookie. She's very engaged in her local municipal governments in Toronto, which have a very different flavor than here, as you can imagine. But, nonetheless. So yeah, turn it over. Questions, comments?
Thank you, Haley. And at this point, maybe I'll just open it up and let you run this part from an engagement perspective. Yeah.
Go first, Gord. First.
No, mine was just a more, you mentioned LTRTs based out of Toronto, correct? So how familiar are you with the sort of rules and regulations here in BC, and how challenging has that been, or not challenging at all, to sort of become familiar with those provincial differential regulations?
Yeah, so surprisingly not challenging, because the lead of our practice is a lawyer, and so she kind of guides the legislative elements of it and then gets us up to speed on that. We've also been doing, the bulk of our work has come from federal accessibility planning, and so there's kind of a trickle down effect from the Accessible Canada Act to the municipal, or pardon me, the provincial accessibility plans. So Ontario is ahead of the game, BC is coming up on the heels, and so they actually are quite similar in structure and expectation. So the learning curve has been minimal. What has been, of course, difficult to capture is just understanding individual municipalities' concerns. So at the provincial legislative level, easy peasy. At the municipal level, about how we can best serve, we have been, supported by very clever people on the municipal staff who have been letting us know, where to look and what to do.
So my reaching out to community members for feedback through Facebook. I just found out you were having pop-ups through Facebook. It came up. The pop-up for yesterday showed up 6 hours after it was over. So I don't necessarily know that Facebook notification of these things is reaching as much of the community as it possibly could. Once I saw it was going on, I forwarded it to several different people individually and other people to try to get them to say, this is happening, please respond to the survey. One of the groups that might be able to reach out is Island Health. Through the care unit there, we've got an Island Health unit that services the whole municipality. I talk with the public health nurses quite often because they come to my house twice a week. And they've got some accessibility issues that they'd like to bring forward too. So it might be, if I don't know whether you can access or send to through Island Health Community Healthcare Unit in Saanich. Some of the pop-ups, unfortunately, for me, I can't make any of them. The one at North Saanich that's being held at the farmers market, I don't know how many people with disabilities are necessarily going to show up there for access just because of the groundwork and stuff there. It's not a place that I'll be going to talk about accessibility because it doesn't work for me. And I do know other people that have just had some knee surgeries that won't be attending. Hopefully they'll fill the survey out online. Right. So I have been kind of directing them to other people, and also through, I don't know about, like, there's Bayshore Care Center in Sidney. I've talked to some of them, some of the care workers at Bayshore. I've asked them to try to fill it in as well. So again, I don't know, with me with Facebook and they're limiting news and whatever, sometimes it's just not the best
So if it's, I don't know if it's paid advertising or if it was just getting posted, then I think really the CO that may have suppressed those.
But suppress some of it, right? So it's coming in kind of after the fact. It's like, holy smokes. I don't know what the answer is because it's just that same old question. Information is out there, but you have to access the information.
Yeah.
No, and that's excellent feedback. So we've worked with common marketing staff and aging municipalities to distribute the information on all the social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and as well printed physical materials out in the community, because for some people, access to technology is a barrier. So that's great feedback. Do you have insight about improved channels of access as far as?
I was going to ask today, is there anything going out in the
Or
community?
something like that, the next door.
Yeah, some of the group things. I wondered whether anything would be going out in the print, the Peninsula News, which would have been out today. Just because there are a lot of people and even myself, I'm trying to get off Facebook. I just don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Really should. Yeah, so, but I don't know, like, I don't get the print version of Peninsula News, but I do get it on my computer. So I am trying to feed more into that kind of information gathering.
Well, and spoiler alert, Kayla and I had recommendations to make the news publication more accessible. So, stay tuned.
So, okay.
But yeah, and this is exactly the kind of feedback, understanding how people receive information.
Yeah. So I don't know, again, I don't know who you reach out to with Island Health or whoever to try to just maybe get some of their input as well.
Is it Dale?
Yes, are you finding it maybe a little different in this free municipality compared to some of the other ones because of age? Distribution?
I'm supporting.
No, I was gonna say, like we were made aware, and through my, being very nerdy and reading everybody's official movie and all that fun stuff and census data, that there is a higher median age in this area. And so I think we knew going into it that we were going to get a lot of feedback about physical accessibility of spaces and, whether the sidewalks are accessible and whether you can get into buildings and stuff. But I think one of the things that, Haley and I both with people with invisible disabilities is that we're trying to capture as wide a range of disabilities within the municipalities that exist. And also,
Not only,
yes,
because I have hearing disability that started in my 30s.
yes,
And for instance, one of the building code things that I'd like to see is in new buildings having fire alarms,
visual fire alarms with the strobe. Yeah.
because you must understand that.
Yes.
Because for people to buy those systems after a building's in tends to be,
Very
for some people, cost prohibitive. And I set up in my old building here in Sidney where I would go, if something happened, to my neighbor and physically help her because she wouldn't have heard anything. And that was just because she was a neighbor and we were both hearing impaired, but I would hear the alarm and she wouldn't.
Right.
So even a bed shaker would have been pretty hard for her because she had dementia as well. So things like that in new buildings, and that had nothing to do with age. That's hearing impaired.
That's right.
And most people wouldn't even think of that.
Yeah, well, I think the one advantage, in fact, with some of the demographics through municipalities is that there's greater buy-in for accessibility because a lot of people tend to misperceive accessibility as a niche issue that impacts a small group of people, and it actually impacts a very large group of people. And I think we can all agree that at some point in our lifespan, it will impact all of us. And so having that representation of people who can say, hey, look, I'm in the season of life where these things do affect me, and having a wider and more visible population of people who have these needs, it's easier to justify when you're putting forward motions or you're budgeting for it in the municipal budget to say, this isn't a niche issue, this is a very large issue. So I would say, if anything, it's been kind of an advantage in having people, both community members whose needs, like they're attuned to those needs and sharing that information with us, but also in having the ear of people who can make change about it because they can't deny that it is a critical community issue. So yeah, I haven't Anything that's been an asset.
Yeah, I think if anything, you know, one of the things of, I think by virtue of having a slightly more aged population as well, is a lot of people may be experiencing barriers to accessibility, but because, you know, the language around accessibility and, you know, the discussion around it and sort of it being in that, like the forefront of people's minds hasn't historically been as much of a thing, is that they don't realize that it is actually a barrier to accessibility that they're experiencing. And so one of the things that I think Haley and I were doing a lot yesterday was we were kind of helping tease out that from the people that we spoke with. And
Because
you
it's
know,
not okay to say anything.
well, yeah, or
Like
they just
hearing
don't-
aids are not accepted because that makes you old. Glasses are okay, but hearing aids make you old.
Yeah, and so I think one of the, you know, sort of big, like the overarching themes of these plans is it's really about capacity building, both within the municipalities and within their governance structures, but also within the communities too, because there's, you know, there's a big opportunity here for an educational sort of, you know, endeavor, especially around accessibility and getting people to connect those dots, which is what we do.
Yeah, and we met people yesterday who were using mobility devices, and we would ask them, what has your experience been navigating? And they'd say, oh, I'm lucky, I get along fine, I can do my errands. And we would say, but where don't you go? Right? Because there you get stuck in this is, you know, my day-to-day, I've developed a routine that feels comfortable for me. Where don't you go? And that's when they start going, oh, well, now that you mention it,
Yeah.
I don't tend to participate in this, and I don't, yeah.
And
A farmer's market would be an example.
Lots of places,
Yeah.
lots of places. I just don't go.
Yeah, and so that's, I think reframing the expectation even for people who live with disabilities about what they are entitled to access versus it was like, I get along fine. Yeah. Fine is good. Let's aim for better.
Like the plexiglass for COVID, I understood it, but for hearing impaired, that's, to me, that just killed any hearing that I have.
Yeah,
Because nothing goes through
yeah, that sound barrier there.
plexiglass. And I'm sorry, you might as well just said, take your hearing aids out, because I can't hear a word you're saying, because the plexiglass killed it.
And I
I think
think
an induction loop would be helpful.
Yes. I think that's a perfect example too of how emergency measures that needed to be deployed very quickly didn't have enough of the thought process in how it would impact people. And so again, with these plans, although we would like to see a magic wand, it's more about like, let's do the hard work of investigation and thinking in this first 3-year phase to make sure that we're not tearing down and rebuilding things in an inefficient fashion. So you might have new housing, for example, that is great for mobility access, but doesn't have visual fire alarms, that doesn't. So, you know, we don't want this retrofit mentality. We want the forward thinking mentality. Sure. Sorry, Councillor Terry.
Councillor Terry. So I'll echo some of Charlene's comments in terms of the approach so far. Yeah, so the pop-ups is a drag that there wasn't more advance notice. The locations of them, the ones that I saw on Facebook actually gave different dates. So I don't know if the dates changed or just, so one of, or no, not the dates, it was the location.
Right.
One said it was at Beacon and 4th, another thing said it was Beacon and 2nd. What I noticed after, by that time it was too late anyways. And yeah, so I think I hope there's gonna be, you're gonna include more opportunities for whether you call them pop-ups or town halls or whatever. And some things to think, so in terms of other groups to reach out. Jennifer, actually from the Shoal Center, she put a great list together a while ago that she uses to get the word out to people for the accessibility fair that they host. And so I think you updated that, right?
We did.
Yeah, so all of the care homes, because once in a while we've got people come out to some of these events and they said, oh, if you ask me, you know, we've come across lots of issues of accessibility dealing with our clients. There's also the White Cane Club, which Vanessa is a member of, so representing the blind community. So that with that.
One of the other club members yesterday.
Oh, great. Yeah. And they get hosted at Shoal Center where Jennifer is, you know, the school district. So, you know, Sidney Elementary School perhaps also might be good opportunities. I just want to comment also on the comment you just made about asking people where they don't go. Because I thought that was just such a good point that able-bodied, maybe we get kind of lulled into the feeling that, well, things seem to be going okay. And even they think that things are going okay, just because they've been so programmed to thinking, okay, well, that's not accessible to me, so I just don't go there.
My
So-
immediate needs are met, so I must be doing fine.
Yeah, so I
have a
think-
full and rich life.
So, yeah, so I think that's really cool that you're kind of going that step further to draw that out from people. In terms of the approach, I like, that the draft's gonna come back to the committee, so they'll have a opportunity. The only thing I'd highlight is that the committee only meets once every 2 months. So I don't know, but I guess our next meeting would be end of September. So, yeah, so just kind of factoring that into your plans and that.
In terms of procedure, I don't know if there's plans to circulate the plan and call a special meeting, or if you will circulate it in mid-September and then attend to it at the.
Yeah, I just have kind of a preliminary answer. You'll note at the bottom of the agenda, it's our regular meeting, September 28th, and Sandy put a big asterisk to the needs rescheduling. So we will reach out about the time that best works for people. We will give ample time. I expect we will want to, digest it and reflect upon it. Having all three councils having recently gone through OCP reviews or currently undergoing OCP reviews, I think it was a really good lesson for staff in how to collect and collate comments. So we will certainly give some structure as to how we would appreciate comments in advance and then have that facilitated discussion at that September meeting to receive your feedback, so that when it does go to council, and I think tentatively scheduled for October 10th to get all three meetings. But obviously if we need more time, obviously if we need more time, we will delay that so that we have time to bring it to council with full comments and SPAAC reflected, because I think that would be a priority for each council to ensure that they have undergone on that revision.
Is the survey available like in hard copy? So if you go to the White Cane Club or you go to seniors home or whatever, you can have.
We do, so we brought hard copies today. I don't know if it would be appropriate for us to physically go to those places or to distribute it to people here who have relationships with those places to share. We'll leave it up to you what feels more organic. Then in terms of receiving the survey data back, I don't know if one of the members of the project team would collect it and mail it to us for analysis, or if you're more patient, you want to scan it. Yeah, so we can meet on that after.
We will absolutely loop back with the consultants on the feedback of the group, and we're happy to have our staff, and we are already with our age-friendly communities plan dropping off staff surveys to certain organizations with whom we have regular contact and have expressed a desire to that would be easier for their membership. We're happy to do that and work on completing that data, whether it's a hard copy or an electronic version. Survey is open for quite a number of weeks. I can confirm that we did have PNR ads for the accessibility pop-ups, but that we will do another round in August prior to the survey closing to encourage more members of the public for whom the PNR is their method of communication to do one final.
Interesting enough, I had a meeting yesterday with a group who are working on not accessibility, but something else. And one of their ideas was, going back down to grassroots. So having information brought to somebody and spreading it out. So that person would spread it out to 5 people. And then each of those 5 people would be asked to spread it out to 5 people more. So for instance, I could get the survey, I can pass it on to different organizations that I have collaborations with and ask them to pass it on to who they know. I think that's a really great way of getting the word out, kind of grassroots style, because a lot of people do not do Facebook, or Facebook, comes out too late. And so I think, that's something that we could all do and get this survey out quite far quickly.
Good, we really appreciate that. Yes, yes. We'll convene with the project team to talk about, make sure they have access to your contact information, and that's exactly a great idea. You have relationships that we don't have, and we would love you to take those relationships, in good faith to reach as many people as we can. as many impacted groups as we can. So thank you for the offer to help facilitate that connection.
Just to add to, or the questioning, I guess, from a involvement perspective across the country, the cognitive group, in my experience, seems to get missed sometimes in terms of involvement with these various groups. And it's not necessarily age related or problems occur in society. They probably wouldn't necessarily be involved because it's the caregivers, a lot of cases that represent them. How have you found their involvement? I would suspect that it could be a missing piece to the puzzle. So the mechanisms you've got in place right now may not necessarily draw out their input. It really requires involvement of the support groups, educational people, the people themselves, the ones that can converse. And I think that they have some unique requirements that don't necessarily flow through the documents.
Yeah, and that's, in my years in consulting and accessibility practices, we have found not only is it difficult to connect with that population, but also there is unfortunately some gatekeeping of that population as well. So the caregivers they want to be the spokesperson, they want to articulate what their vision for those people is for their life, which we don't agree with. I think that's where the pop-ups, ideally getting out into the community, hopefully we can have kind of that organic foot traffic where we can actually have FaceTime with people who have cognitive disabilities, where filling out a survey might not be the most accessible way, reading the text and producing written text. And so when it becomes a conversation and exchange, further, I think sometimes, the language that we use, oh, what do you think about accessibility in your community? Well, what does that mean to a person? But if we say, tell me about your day. What do you like to do? What things do you find enjoyable? Are there parts of your day that are more challenging? It changes the conversation. You can read between the lines of what the priorities and needs are, which I think is the best way to engage. The difficult thing is, though, of course, you have to have the chance to have those conversations. And so,
that's the biggest challenge. And I agree with what you're saying, but I disagree to some extent in terms of my experience locally, let's say on the island, with caregiver groups, not to be named. They do have some good, open-minded people that can represent the population and bring the population, quite frankly, and help interpret what they want to say to you. And if that's missing, the contact, I think that is a missing aspect, but worthwhile doing.
yes.
David, if I can just interject and combine maybe what you said and what Jennifer said. So my lived experience is that my mother had ALS. So I think from a perspective of someone who, that was our challenge, a similar cognitive impairment, I think if we take that phone tree model, and I'm a staff liaison, but I have representation in that group as well and connections. And if we can each reach out to people that we have worked with and have a great experience with, and know that we're all coming from a place of wanting justice, I think it's important. And that's one that I really relate to in terms of how can I reflect what our as a family challenges were, and how, as a patient, what her challenges were as well. But I appreciate for that.
And I do think that there are groups out there, and unfortunately, a lot of the groups aren't local in the 3 jurisdictions. They have representatives here. They're supporting people here at all age groups, and they, for the most part, are in the city. But they would probably, if they were contacted, be willing to have support and be very interested in not necessarily going to the fair, but arranging for some kind of, and potentially bring some people to talk as well.
Yeah, and importantly, one of the features of the survey, we indicate that you can provide feedback in non-written form, so in video form as well. Part of that was, I'm fluent in ASL, so if somebody was more comfortable producing a response in sign language, but similarly, if somebody preferred to engage in a conversation and respond to us, we have an email to direct that. So again, if it's somebody with a cognitive disability who writing a response wouldn't be as accessible, but they're working in kind of a conversation, ask and answer, that the caregiver support person could, if not read the survey verbatim, speak to certain highlights on the survey. So we're certainly open to receiving feedback in multiple linguistic formats. But I think that phone tree idea is really useful, and we'll get on for sure.
Is there time to add a question to your survey? Or is it already, because I think that what aren't you doing would be a valuable question on the survey as well. Because that even triggered me today. It's like, oh, yeah.
We do have a question. It's not necessarily phrased that way, but the question is, how did that impact you? So of the barriers that you experienced. So there's a few different options. So like, I felt like my needs weren't met. I felt like I wasn't listened to. I felt like I wasn't seen as a member of my community, like those sorts of.
I think by asking the question, what don't you do though? Because I'm the same way. I'm not going to say, oh, I didn't think about not accessing it and what was the ramifications until you said, what don't you do? And then I started listing off the things I don't do. I didn't go to my high school reunion last weekend because the venue they held it at was all gravel. I wouldn't have been able to move around. I'd been stuck in one spot.
We have we have the technical capability to.
Like that would
edit
be,
the survey now. I don't know from a consistency of materials that are being sent
Already,
out.
yeah.
How we decide to see what feelings are about that.
it's a good pointer for me when talking.
Yeah, it's not, it's not like we're collecting numeric data. So I don't see why, first 20 respondents missed that question.
Yeah,
I get it. I don't really see that as tainting the data, so to speak, but I don't want to speak out of turn. So we can talk to the project team about whether like I said, it's possible to do, whether just from a procedural standpoint, if it makes sense. But thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
I just had a question. Where do you determine where your pop-up stands are? Because I know like Centennial Park and certain places, I would never find you or think that you were there or go there myself because I would get lost. So how do you determine where you find the right people?
So we relied on municipal staff to tell us where they felt in terms of foot traffic, in terms of people who use the spaces, so a variety of demographics that we would connect with, spaces where they had hosted other pop-ups or events before, so they knew they'd have the infrastructure to kind of set up the pop-ups. So being from central Canada, we were reliant on on expertise around here, but I think it is in conversations that we have in the future and when we're doing this kind of work, to something that we have actually recommended to past clients is actually creating an internal roster of accessible venues, accessible vendors, so that becomes the go-to. Okay, for this need, who do we go to? Where do we go to? So I would admit that probably some of the choices aren't most physically accessible in certain cases, and that is a gap in terms of the discovery work that we've done. But I think that's a really key insight in terms of event planning and community engagement to think about, okay, what are our, and not only that, but if it's a consistent set of locations, right? So if there's kind of a roster of spaces that tend to be used, it's easier for people to find and to say, if it's in this municipality, it's probably here,
Well, I think, if I may, I think finding out that triggered me as well, that comment about where are you not going or whatever. My dad was just recently into a wheelchair and got stuck at the Bay Center downtown because the elevators were out and he couldn't. And so
Don't go downtown.
yeah, well, he's learning that on his own. But I think if there was an aggregate for our Peninsula communities about areas where we probably don't know where all of our blind spots are. And so if it was an aggregate to say, okay, well, these are the identifiable areas that we seem to have challenges with. And then from there, that at least gives us, maybe a bit higher level benchmark about where we should be looking at focusing some of these resources. Back to your point about, there's so many needs and how do you address them with the finite amount of resources available. But if there was from the community that we're trying to get engagement from, comments and feedback about where they're finding the challenges, that would be helpful, I think, for us as some of the decision makers. Anyway.
Yeah, we did actually get some, when I was speaking with a few residents yesterday at the pop-ups and stuff, I actually was given a lot of feedback about some really great accessible areas at least within Sidney. I mean, hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll get that in North Saanich and Central Saanich as well. But there were a few people that were saying, like the intersection near Tanner's bookstore was recently redone with the condo that had gone up in that area. And so they added like the chirps for the crosswalks and, you know, better sort of like wayfinding aids in terms of like how to navigate that space and stuff. And so like that feedback is really great too, because then it's like, well, that's something that was done really well. And you can, you know, actually go out, take a picture of it and be like to staff, you know, this was the thing that was done quite well. Let's do this again.
Probably the mayor's influence.
We also heard, I think that for some members that an interim solution in terms of inaccessible spaces is that idea of having some kind of roster or even wayfinding or signage around the community to let them know where it is, quote unquote, you know, safe to go from their perspective. So that at the very least, they can feel safe about the choices they make now until further spaces are made more accessible. And I think that happens for a lot of people with acquired disabilities when you're just learning to navigate it. You haven't developed that mental, I go here, I'm safe here, I know how to access that, I know how to get around that. And so as we said, although we would like to wave a magic wand and make everything accessible, in the interim, kind of spotlighting where it is accessible and say, okay, these are your kind of go-to zones, and now what can we learn from them and how can we extend the sort of sphere of that, you know, that accessibility.
What I would just add to that is I think it's good to have that sort of inventory of accessible spaces, but for the purposes of consultation with the community, it's one thing to have an accessible space like, okay, it's flat, they can get in there, we're going to have people who speak sign language, that's cool, but how easy is for them to get there? So thinking about people who have visual impairments, okay, if it's going to be, you know, the accessible waterfront at Sidney, that's nice, but how are they going to get there? It means maybe calling a handy dart. And is a handy dart available? I don't know how far in advance you have to book. Handy
2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks.
If you're lucky.
2 weeks in advance.
Yeah, if you book 13 days in advance, you're standby, you probably won't get it.
Yeah, or so thinking about, okay, yeah, it's a physically you can get, you know, in the doors, so to speak, but to actually transport themselves there. You know, things like the markets, like as Charlene said, you know, I'm thinking, oh, Sidney Market, you know, our street market, there can get thousands of people there.
If you
However-
can find parking.
Well, so parking will be an issue if they have a car, they can get somebody there. Also, what I've heard anecdotally from people in the community is they just stay away from the market because there's just way too many people, right? It's hard to navigate with, you know, in a wheelchair or a walker, so they just don't go there. So I guess my point is when you're planning your next pop-ups or next round of engagement, think about going to them where, like the Shoal Center is a good place and a place that they're kind of used to getting to. It's close to where a number of them are. So doing more effort to go to where they are, like maybe actually attending the White Cane Committee meeting or maybe Vanessa can, you know, champion that one. So, yeah.
Well, it speaks to the intersection of all these things, right? So when we're
Yeah.
talking about the accessibility of physical spaces, if you do kind of that work back schedule of how do you pick a space, how do you schedule it, how do you promote it? So having promotion and comms messaging come out well in advance to facilitate, I need to arrange a support person, a caregiver, transportation to the event is another thing to pay attention to. So suddenly something that was once about physical accessibility actually becomes about communication, accessibility of communications as well.
And transportation.
And transportation.
Yeah.
David.
Yeah, Bill, I'd like to start. I really appreciate sort of that high level approach for this first iteration of the plan. I think there's a lot of challenges that come about because of called cultural differences. You know, I'm fairly new to the disability community and I'm there as a caregiver as opposed to a person with disabilities. I thought I knew accessibility, and then I came to this committee and another committee before, and I learned that I don't know a lot about accessibility, and I've relied a lot on standards and that in the past. So I really appreciate that perspective on it and developing that sort of cultural shift in how we do things and reduce friction in that. couple other things, two other hats that I wear. I'm the president of the Central Saanich Community Association. And we've got a great working relationship with the District of Central Saanich, and I'm more than happy to fan out anything through our communications channels as well. I regularly share the district's social media communications through our social media streams as well. And through that, I can also reach out to the Saanich and Brentwood Bay Community Associations and send anything out through them. We've got, I don't know, a couple hundred at least email addresses that represent households in Central Saanich that we can directly communicate to. Another hat that I wear is I'm on the school district's accessibility committee. So if you're looking to connect with them, I'd be more than happy to help facilitate that and get you the right contact people there.
I would also really appreciate if you could send me, I don't know, the vitamins that you're taking, or that, like, how do you have all this energy? I would, like, But no, that's wonderful. And that's exactly, I mean, I'm so pleased with kind of the outcome of this dialogue today, because it really is, we all kind of exist in silos and we try to cross-collaborate, cross-pollinate, but you know, certain people are going to have better insight or better outreach or better connections to things that, you know, we haven't seen or investigated. And this is really helpful to expanding the breadth of the scope of who we can connect with.
So what's the process you want to use or staff want to use? So, you know, David's got contacts, Jennifer's got an awesome list, other people have, how do you want us to get that to you? Should we send that to staff, or do you have an email that people can just email you directly to say, here's how you can contact the White Cane Club, or Jennifer can send you her, if she wants, her list of different organizations that you could use? What's the best way to?
I think generally speaking, like, because we are, you know, the consultants and we're kind of an unknown entity to a lot of these groups, even though we are becoming known to you now, since we're having this discussion for today, sometimes it can be, like, in previous experiences, we found that it's easier in terms of the known entities to these community groups and committees and organizations to be the ones to do the introduction. So I think probably our plan today was we would send a follow-up email to the committee afterwards with all the links and all the information and stuff. And then that would be, if you felt comfortable distributing that to whoever blessings. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Does that work for you? Is that okay?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we all knew what the process was, that we weren't going to be sitting here waiting for you to ask us where the, or.
Yeah, and then we were like, why didn't you? ask
Yeah,
me?
yeah,
And no one does anything. Yeah.
Previously, we've been communicating through Sandy Nelson. I don't know if that's the appropriate point of contact to say, you know, thank you for your time. Here's the survey link. Here's other information, and she can distribute it to.
Sandy's on vacation for a couple of weeks.
Oh, weeks. Okay, so no.
Okay, great. Fantastic.
Yes.
So, so in terms of turning away from that just for a second, the engagement, but the actual things that are going to be in the plan. So we had, I believe you have the format or some of those big sort of categories that you talked about. We had come up with goals and strategies that the committee had thought. I think that was back in January. So I'm presuming that you have that and that you'll incorporate that so that we don't have to kind of reiterate that today, that, you know, that we spend some time on this. Here's some of those big picture strategic things and some possible strategies and goals. So you've got that.
Yes, so you have, we're providing with ample documentation and feedback and meeting minutes. Yeah, so we absolutely wanted to definitely make this feel like a forward momentum about where the committee started, where the arrow was pointing, and where, you know, ideally the accessibility plans being kind of a roadmap for actually building the structure to achieve some of those outcomes.
Will it have some sort of reporting out or option? So we're going to do this plan, you know, the thing with plans,
right?
Because,
Yes.
oh, look at us. We did,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then, so will you be, you know, in your experience with other plans, is that kind of something that's incorporated in terms of, okay, here's the general plan, and then each municipality might have their separate little, you know, action plan or how they're going to execute, and then a process on reporting back as to how the plan is carried out?
So the legislation right now has a reporting structure to the province. I don't believe that there's anything in it that talks about reporting structure to community members. However, we have had some clients in the past choose to do that. And we often encourage clients to do that, whether it's, if it's just an organization reporting back to their employees about the progress and stuff like that. So I think that would be something we can discuss with the project team if it's feasible. But I do think that that's a really good way to build trust. And it's also really helpful from a transparency perspective, being like, we said that we were going to do these things, and, we can tell the province what we're doing, but also, the people who helped us come up with the things that we were going to do should, have a little report back moment as well. So I think we can definitely discuss that at more at greater length.
And the commitments in the plan are always framed in terms of the language of SMART goals, so specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound. So that's easier too to say, you said you were going to do this, this person or this entity was going to do this thing by this date. Did it happen or did it not? That's like the most straightforward way to accountability is it's not nebulous what it is that's being committed to. So hopefully that will assist as well. But yeah, there is a feedback structure reporting to the province in terms of how that goes. There is also the opportunity, all of the plans have a communication method for anybody, the public, to read because it's publicly published and give feedback on the plan. And so that feedback has to be collected and stored. It doesn't necessarily have to be actioned immediately. It has to be taken into account for future accessibility planning initiatives as well. So that's something that is built into the legislation. But what we have, we can just pat ourselves on the back a little bit. This is where, and I'm just warning the municipal staff that we work with. We are one of the things that we like to do after your plans are published is, a few months down the road, say, hey, plan going. Anything you're having trouble actually?
You'll get an email.
We know some very charming professionals who might help you give structure to that specific commitment. So the federal entities who published plans back in December of 2022 and now June of this year have already started reaching out to us to say, remember when you helped us promise this? We're not sure we know how to do that. Can you help us do that? So it's, that I think that's another good thing about having that relationship with accessibility professionals is where the municipalities have the will to do something, but not necessarily the know-how, in a sense that we are there for that additional support. So, I mean, we'll try our best to keep tabs. Yeah, I think we've made a good impression so far. David.
I'm just cognizant of the time here. We've got a number of items still to go through. Any last questions or comments from members? And so I'll give it to you if you wanted to wrap it up or if you had anything else.
I mean, I think this has been extremely valuable and sort of went through the flow of exactly what we intended this conversation to be. I would like to ask if you are comfortable with us remaining in your space and listening to the rest of the meeting so that we're just hearing more about the procedure and everything and understanding the group better. We don't want to invade your space, but we'd love to benefit from the conversation if that's fine.
Absolutely. You're more than welcome to stay, and I'll actually be sending the link for this video off to one of the other committees I send on so that they can perhaps glean some benefit from your knowledge of what you shared here with us today. Vanessa knows who I'm talking about. Thank you very much. This has been fantastic. So we'll move on to what's listed as item 9 on the agenda. Other items? Oh, sorry. Mayor, your worship.
Thank you, Chair. Just my apologies. I just have to excuse myself now, but I just want to extend a formal welcome to the committee to be working in Sidney for the next period, and say express my gratitude and thanks to everyone, but to the residents with lived experience, to the residents who are caregivers. I think we've heard from a number of people today, and I'm included in that, with a close family member who had an accident, had a fall, and now has both cognitive and physical disabilities. Will have those for the rest of her life. So thank you for your participation. Thank you for stepping forward with that experience and also the advocacy that you're doing with other hats that you wear. Thank you to the association here, to the community organizations, to the Shoal Center and the Panorama Rec Center. You have a lot of experience with our community, and that's valuable to have that at this table as well. Thanks to our elected representatives, I think this is a great process we have in place where the 3 municipalities have come together to have a tri-municipal process. And I think it's working well as we've, gaining experience over the first year. And thank you to the staff who support the process, because, the most important part of local government is that we're transparent to our communities, to our residents in what we're doing to improve our communities, to make our communities a better place. So thank you to all, and it was a pleasure to join you today. And thank you to the consultants. We're excited to see the work that you're doing and that staff were able to engage you, and we look forward to that process going forward in the fall as well. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And actually, just to echo those comments, I really do appreciate the work that has gone into all this. The committee members, our council liaisons and staff. It's an incredible amount of work, and I really do appreciate it. So, okay, we'll move on to item number 9 then. Other items, local community accessibility grants, SPARC BC, and that's Town of Sidney.
So there is a grant funding opportunity for the municipalities to pursue. The Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction has announced 5 million in funding for local governments. That's basically enough money for each local government to receive $25,000 in funding for various accessibility projects. Staff have outlined 3 different projects the committee may wish to endorse. However, the recommendation is that we wait until the accessibility plan is adopted. This is because the date for the grant program it ends in March of 2026. So we do have some time here. Knowing that the plan will be produced, in relatively short term here. It may be best to wait until maybe some other priorities pop.
Thank you very much, Richard. Any questions or comments? Councilor Newton?
Sure, just very briefly, through chair to staff. I'm just curious why this is even on our agenda. I would have just assumed that staff would go ahead and go through the grant process or through council, and why this has come to this committee.
I guess there were the 3 immediate options for SPAAC to endorse.
Okay.
That may have been a reason to get your feedback on.
And Councilor O'Keefe?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a good idea to come to the committee, just because there's a lot of different things in terms of accessibility. So with only $25,000, I think it's a good idea to get some input from the committee in terms of what they think is important. So I thank staff for bringing it forward. Couple questions I have in regards to the about the on-street accessible parking standard. So when they talk, it says, so when we're talking about a standard, so does that mean like how big they would be and what colors they would be? Is that kind of what we're talking about? And also like how many there should be within the town? I guess what I'm thinking back to is our downtown parking study. And in that part of that is looking at, the number of accessible parking stalls we should have, what they should look like, where they should be located. So does it incorporate all of those things?
I think that it'll be an opportunity to hire a consultant. And with that, we'll provide what we would like to see.
Okay, so they would, I guess, make recommendations also on how many you should have and all that sort of thing.
If I can, through the chair, Councilor O'Keefe, yeah, I anticipate it's all of those aspects, but so this was prepared by the Director of Engineering, fortunately, Ms. Clary's on vacation, so she's not here to speak to it directly. We can certainly provide additional information through engineering, Councilor O'Keefe, but I anticipate it's the elements.
And just a follow-up, if I may. So when they talk about a design for up to 5 parking locations. So I guess I'm wondering why 5? Is that because, are we thinking that the average is going to cost an average of $5,000 per space, and therefore that's why there's 5?
I can't, through the chair, I can't speak to it.
Okay.
Yeah, we would have to go through engineering part.
Okay.
To indicate why
Okay.
5 was selected.
And I guess my thinking is also, I would presume if town of Sidney went through this and came up with some sort of standard, that would, I presume the other municipalities would be interested in looking at that standard and considering it in their municipalities as well. Looking to Central Saanich.
Sure. Through the chair, I think, spoke briefly with staff in Central Saanich and in their process, I think, of applying for the same grant. So how that is applied
Okay.
within Central Saanich, yet to be determined. Yeah.
Yeah, if I can through the chair, so the group who's putting on this grant, who's received the funding, is putting on a really strong push right now, I think, realizing that all these plans will be coming forward. And perhaps if I may, the reason it's coming forward is it either requires a motion from staff or an item listed in the accessibility plan. So that's probably why the group brought it forward. I would say that generally our 3 engineering teams work together fairly regularly, and I would expect coordination if you apply for parking and we apply for closed captioning council meetings, which is one of our items that we're thinking of, that we would look to things that can possibly be shared. Redefining our engineering standards in the next few years. Well, and I would, having heard this, be mindful of any application that we make, being a benefit to the 3 municipalities, I think is a good way to take a project.
Okay, so just my initial sort of wrap up comment on this is I would be more inclined to go with the alternate, the other optional recommendation about moving forward on this now, just based on what I've heard at this committee and in the community over the last few years. Parking seems to be a real big issue. So it seems to me something that would, I don't think we would need to wait to see an accessibility plan to know that that's an important thing. I think it's something that would be a good option, but I won't make a motion at this point. I'm interested to hear what the community members and other members have to say in regards to that.
Lee, you had a comment?
Well, I think my question was answered, Chair. I was concerned that we were moving forward with something with Sidney when we're supposed to be a tri-municipal committee, and wanted to know if we should be waiting for submissions from others and coordinating them. But it sounds like they're going to be coordinated, so I'm happy.
Anyone else? If not, I'll speak. On the accessible parking item, especially with the design standards, my personal feeling is save the money. We've got lots of resources. I'm one of the guys that local governments come to for accessible parking standards. I work with the Social Planning and Research Council of BC on accessible parking standards development of that. City of Victoria has just recently updated their standards, and there's a lot of resources there that are already available that this committee could take a look at and probably do the work of the consultant, at least on the design of those elements. It's relatively straightforward. There's standards, the Canadian Standards Association as well, that we could look at, but we could bring that back to our committee and do that design here with the support of our local governments and their staff. And then that I think that $25,000 grant would be better spent someplace else. And with that in mind, I would be inclined to defer the application until we've had a sort of a broader look, coordination of the 3 municipalities on the spending of that, and even having that accessibility plan, because that we might find that there's one of those elements that's the higher level, broad perspective thing that we don't necessarily have the expertise at this committee to be able to address, and we need that additional support to look at. Any other questions or comments?
I'm kind of with David on that. There's the information on parking. We've got that, and I think the money could be directed better. I mean, basically, if staff wants to come out and spend a day with me, I can show them
For lack of parking.
or how it could be improved or made better with, and by following standards and procedures that people have already worked on.
And if someone wants to take a look at an example, downtown Victoria on Broughton Street at Douglas, they've just installed one of their new standard on-street accessible parking spaces with the curb ramp, the blue curb, the motor vehicle act sign is right next to the Portland Blue public washroom there. So there are examples available in the community that we can even go and trial if we wanted to.
Okay,
Yeah, Mr. Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to just quickly interject. Yes, as Richard has pointed out, you really have until, we can submit up to, I think it's the spring of 2026. So there's ample time, obviously. It's also indicated in the staff report that it would appear that there's enough funding that is going to be spread out amongst all the municipalities in BC that applies. So it's almost like a guarantee. There's no competition around it. So from a timing perspective, it shouldn't be an issue. I think what I'm hearing is that the preference is, at least anyways, the timing of the accessibility plan would work well. It's well in advance of the deadline for submission. So I think that the recommendation that's contained in the report would be appropriate enough, right?
Councilor O'Keefe.
so I'll move the recommendation that the town of Sidney make an application to the local community accessibility grant program after the accessibility plan is adopted.
I get a seconder? Member Froome, any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Next item is Greenglade Playground. Oh, this is a fun one. And I'll pass that off to Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So brief verbal report just for the purposes of information sharing. Panorama Recreation staff have approved the design for a new play structure that will be going in Greenglade Community Center. The primary intent of the play structure is to meet the needs of our licensed childcare programs for preschool and out of school care. But recognizing that it's an important community amenity, we're sharing the information with this group. So the approved design includes a number of accessible elements within both meeting the licensed space requirements and broader need. So a few elements such as pour in place rubber surfacing, grant access to structure, visual color contrasting for visual delineation and traffic areas are some of the considerations of the place. We expect the project to start in October of 2023 with completion in December of 2023 and opening sometime in January.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for Catherine? Councilor Newton.
Thank you and appreciate the update on that. It's pretty exciting to see that happening. Slightly related, but not specific to this, was Brewster sort of and Panorama stepped up to look at sort of compiling an inventory of accessible playground structures and interactive components. I'm just wondering, has that begun at all? Are you? Okay, sure. Yeah, and was just more out of curiosity to see if that's begun yet or not. And I can appreciate that Panorama's got a lot of things going on their plate at the moment, so.
Councilor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Just related to that, I think the other thing she was going to do was share that information with municipal staff in terms of we're doing this kind of accessible play structure. So if you're doing something at Jubilee Park or at Breather Park, maybe do something a little bit different. So there was some diversity. So I presume that she's following up on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So through the chair, we've been in discussion with staff from the town of Sidney about the elements in this play structure and recognition that there's some other plans being brought forward for that area. So.
That's great. I just want to say thank you very much for that. And I think that's one of the, really cool things about this committee and community partners like Panorama who have focused some attention on accessibility play structures. And now the rest of the other 3 communities can tap into that and your willingness to share and collaborate. So I think that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. And one I'd like to comment as well, just I appreciate Panorama. They reached out to me as a parent of a child with significant disabilities for feedback of that. And I've had the opportunity to work with them on this project and provide some support in other ways. And I appreciate being a part of that and just how receptive Panorama is to this and the great work that you guys have done on accessibility. Thank you. So next we'll move on to the article, Nothing About Us Without Us. Vice Chair Froome.
Yeah, I sent this article and it came through the Spinal Cord Injury magazine. And I just thought it was very appropriate in timing with the committee, basically about long-term advocating from disability groups and volunteering and putting in their information and lived experience and insight and the burnout that comes from that. Because like David himself, he's on several committees. I'm on different committees, like the SPAAC isn't the only one that I'm involved with. So there is a burnout level when you see that the wheels of government move slowly, that we're all learning, like, how are we just fixing this? So that learning aspect, so the turnover and the burnout on people with disabilities, continually bringing in their opinions and expertise and whatever. We appreciate, so the flip side of that, it is also saying, I appreciate what staff and what the local governments are doing, because we are starting to see it. There's been a couple of occasions where I want to say thank you. There was a post that came out of Central Saanich to do with chipping. And at the bottom of it, it said, and for people with mobility issues here, and it brought a smile to my face. Not because I was going to chip anything, but because I knew staff was looking at it. Like, I didn't have to phone and say, how will this be handled? So we're starting to see some of the benefits of this, that it's just going to become standard measure that we're going to look at it. We're making a decision. How does this affect accessibility or for everybody in the community? So burnout is there, absolutely. There's new people coming up. There's other people saying, I've had enough. But we're seeing progress, and I think it gives us all hope in moving forward, because we are seeing Panorama is doing playgrounds that are now being coordinated and accessed not only for children, but for parents and grandparents that are disabled that want to go with their families. So the burnout is there, but it's really heartening to see some progress being made. So thank you to everybody.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a good reminder, when I first started getting involved with the accessibility community a few years ago, and still to this day, I leave meetings and think, oh, there was something that I didn't even think about, even when we think we know that there might be an issue. There's always something else that we didn't think about. I was thinking about when we were talking about, say, our parking strategy. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, we definitely have to consult the committee in terms of, how big the accessible parking spaces are and all that sort of thing. But I wasn't thinking about there's other aspects of the parking study that is going to have input. Like, I think somebody brought up the issue of residential parking. And I initially didn't think, well, why would that be an issue with persons with disabilities? But there's issues there. So it's just a good reminder about, nothing about us without us, and just always assuming that I think we need to assume that there's stuff that we still don't know. And so the importance of that, consulting. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Charlene? Okay, next we'll move on to 9D, guidelines for decorative crosswalks and markings. That was the briefing report that Vanessa and I worked on. Did you want to speak to it or do you want me to start?
Go for it.
Okay. So this one came about recently. We've seen a lot of the decorative crosswalks, often rainbow crosswalks in the community, but there's others. If you go to downtown Victoria, they've got some that are, I think they're supposed to be sunflowers. Other communities have done crosswalks showing support for Indigenous communities, orange crosswalks, that sort of thing. And just how can they be done to make sure that they're not potentially creating barriers for other people in the community? And so I did some looking into it, and the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure has a design guide, which is included in the agenda there. But basically, it's the outside edges should have the broad white stripe, which is the standard for the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices for Canada. So that's that manual is the document that's the standard across Canada for all of your highway markings, your stop signs, your parking signs, all that sort of thing. And that's what's also been adopted by the ministry here in BC. So basically what it is just when we're doing a decorative crosswalk, to make sure that you have those elements in place, those two broad white stripes, and ideally, wherever possible, the visual elements should be linear across the street to help, in particular, to help guide people that have low vision. I did put an example in there of a crosswalk from Central Saanich at Bayside School and showed just when you change the ability to see color, half of the crosswalk disappears. And then if you have a central area vision loss, the crosswalk is completely gone. So it's a simple fix just to move forward as the crosswalks are updated. And I'd like to compliment Central Saanich, and I sent the briefing note off to Councillor Newton. And it's unfortunately the crosswalk at Bayside Elementary had been vandalized. The district was out there to repair it, and they added the lines even before our SPAAC meeting here.
Yeah.
So it's great seeing this responsiveness from our communities. Sidney is already doing it, as I highlighted in the briefing note as well. So what did you want to speak to the lived experience side of that? Because you had a friend, Vanessa, that had some experience with it.
Just with the contrast, like often yellow or white with a black surface, they can tell the difference. But if it's blue, purple, any other, there's nothing there. So they don't know which way to go or if there's even a crosswalk there. So having those outside lines makes a huge indication that that's where he's supposed to go and you can still see the road. So for him, it changed. For me, it doesn't because I'm completely blind anyway. But for other people that are slightly visually impaired, it made a huge difference.
Any questions or comments on that? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Just maybe a question through you to any municipal staff. So I'm presuming that if this is a Ministry of Transportation bulletin, like the building code, that it's something that you need to be doing anyway. So do we need to make a motion for staff to look at this, or is this something that they would already be aware of because it's an MOTI bulletin?
Mr. Humble.
I can, Mr. Chair, to Councillor O'Keefe. Yeah, that's an excellent question. One that I don't have the answer to. I know Ms. Clary is aware of this particular provincial sort of document. Having said that, I think that respectfully, maybe a better recommendation, and I certainly understand the rationale. I understand the recommendation that is being suggested in the report, but I think that the three municipal councils will probably want to hear from their respective engineering staff regarding alignment and that sort of thing. So I might suggest that an appropriate recommendation might be that the respective SPAAC councils give consideration to adopting these particular specifications rather than outright adopting, because in considering it, they'll probably want to hear from their staff, or the staff will provide input during the council meeting. So just the suggestion.
I appreciate that, and this is part of this whole learning process about how to more appropriately word things. Thank you. Did you want to make that, does someone want to make that motion then?
Okay,
Or did-
so, okay, let's try this. I'll recommend that Central Saanich, North Saanich, and Town of Sidney we recommend that the councils of Central Saanich, North Saanich, and Town of Sidney give consideration to incorporating MOTI Technical Bulletin T02/2020, et cetera, into municipal design standards for any crosswalk that does not conform to current manual of uniform traffic control device pavement markings.
Wow.
Now, and I guess, a question through you, Chair, to staff, whether that number 2 bullet needs to be incorporated, or in terms of that existing decorative crosswalks be updated. I mean, I would presume that when staff are giving consideration, then that would kind of go without saying, or do we need to put that second?
I don't think the additional bullets are necessary at this point. I think staff will
Okay.
have a copy of the report that's been prepared. I think it's very clear in terms of it. So
Okay.
I would suggest that the additional in particulars aren't required at this point.
Okay, all right, I'll leave it at that.
And I'll need a seconder, and then we'll move to discussion. Seconded by Lee. Okay, Councillor Newton, and then Dave Ryder.
Sure, first I will acknowledge the speedy work by the staff at Saanich to resolve the vandalism. Second of all, I guess back to one of the original discussion points and talking points, and with great admiration for staff and the work that they do, and they're the technical experts. Much like what was discussed at the beginning regarding the BC building code changes. I'm assuming that these are guidelines and established already by jurisdictions beyond local governments. I don't want to be telling them back how to do their job. So I'm just curious if maybe, and Mr. Puskas isn't here, but where the gap was, that it wasn't done. There was probably a desire to do something quickly. But where the gap may have been that it didn't follow the already pre-established MODI guidelines. Maybe it's more of a comment there.
Yeah, I can chime in if you'd like. I know for crosswalks, each municipality, I believe, has engineering standards for their drive, the sidewalks, and dips, and all of that is determined by each municipality following professional standards. I know our own at the district are more than 20 years old. So while working with consultants and contractors for this work helps us to, they bring those best practices in, and like with our repainting of our Now Progress Pride Crosswalk, we are able to do those improvements where possible, but those standards do need to be updated, and we are aware of that and working to that. So I think that will likely, if I may anticipate Central Saanich Council's response, will be to refer it to the rewrite of those guidelines, which I hope will have an accessibility lens throughout. But that this probably, the rise of decorative crosswalks is fairly recent. And so we're learning as well in terms of, don't just paint colored lines, but to keep it a crosswalk kind of thing. So I think this is a good learning experience for our staff as well. And that we will fold it into any current review or upcoming review.
Great.
Mr. Ryder?
Yes, directed to you, Chair, as our resident expert on this. And just because of the technical bulletin that's here, it makes a reference to mid-block crosswalk standards and flashing lights and so forth. And I'm wondering if part of that takes into account the LPIs, leading pedestrian intervals, because that's something in other jurisdictions that become appreciate.
Yeah, this technical bulletin doesn't speak to that. The LPIs were identified in the town of Sidney's active transportation plan as one of the ways to improve accessibility. So yeah, this doesn't specifically speak to it. Under the current MOTI standards, if it's a mid-block crosswalk, it's supposed to be a zebra crossing. So that's the big squares as you go across the street because it's more visible in the middle of a block. And what this technical standard does in part is if you have a mid-block crossing, just to help provide that visual cue to drivers, because you don't have those big white blocks going across and the different colors may not be as visible. It provides those two broad white lines as a visual cue for drivers. But for the LPIs and the flashing lights, that's not specific to this. No, that would be then, I believe, and the staff could correct me on this, but I believe that would then fall under the municipal design standards, and it would likely, I suspect, have to do with risk assessments and the the particular crossing area location and traffic speeds and things like that.
And that answers my question. I was wondering who has jurisdiction over that, who's making that decision?
That will probably be highways, isn't it?
Or is it individually?
I'll look to Mr. Humble here.
I would have to refer to. But yeah, I would anticipate it's the engineering department's respective engineering departments following the required traffic standards that are provided by the.
And something else to keep in mind, there's provincial highways, and those include roads that are not actually like the Patney Highway, but the highway is any road, right? So there's provincial highways. I believe highway West Saanich Road, at least part of it is Highway 17A. It's a provincial jurisdiction. So those fall under specifically the provincial design.
Department of Highways. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas our municipal highways would fall under the municipal design standards. So there's a little bit of jurisdictional issue there too. So what we're doing here is just taking this what the province has identified as a way to address some of these issues and just highlighting it for our local governments.
West Saanich Lopside Drive in Sydney.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? If not, then I'll call the question. All in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Seeing none opposed, carried unanimously. Thank you very much, folks. And just as a sort of a follow-up to this, if any of our local governments or people see things that they have questions about, I'd encourage, even outside of these meetings, send us a note. We are a resource. I can usually find the standard or whatever that something's associated with something or best practices. And then I, like with this one, working with Vanessa, work with real subject matter experts on it. So, don't think that you have to wait until the meeting. It would be great when we can resolve these issues before the meeting as well, and then report back on the positives. So that's the last under item 9. So we'll move to item 10, public feedback through emails, Town of Sidney. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thanks. Just remind folks that when we started set up a process for public feedback, one of the things the committee had recommended was that people in the community have accessibility issues. There's a form Sidney has online where they can identify what those are, and staff are usually the best to respond to them first, rather than them coming directly to the committee. And so, because sometimes there's reasons or rationale and staff can explain that very well or follow up with that. So that's what we're getting here. And then it also, having them come to the committee gives us an opportunity to get an idea of some of the issues that are percolating up there. And if we kind of started to see a trend with, we're getting a lot of complaints about this or that, then the committee might be able to look at that and say, well, this seems to be a recurring issue. Maybe we should make a recommendation to council in regards to a policy or a bylaw change or something like that. So that's what it's about. I guess what I see is missing is 2 other municipalities. So I'm not sure what processes Central Saanich and North Saanich have it, whether they have process in place or whether it's, you're just not getting any complaints.
Yeah, I can speak for Central Saanich, and let Trevor speak to North Saanich. So we are launching a new website in August. We're just in the process of finalizing that, and we're pleased to note it will be much more accessible. So we anticipate as a result of the accessibility plan that further work will be required. As part of that relaunch, we do have a form related to accessibility concerns. At this point, the staff who manage the main, generic inboxes, one includes municipal hall, do file away accessibility concerns. And I would say the majority of the concerns the district of Central Saanich here is related to traffic safety. So not accessibility, like traffic safety is our #1 concern from our public right now. And certainly seeing the ones from Sidney on here, if you flag any for accessibility, we'll bring them for a future staff meeting. But that's kind of the theme of our emails at the moment.
Yeah, and speaking for North Saanich, I'll have to check to see if we have a specific accessibility form or anything else, but it's a bit more informal when it's a smaller jurisdiction. And as such, generally, it's going to be either a phone call and then documented through our internal processes to actually go to the engineering staff related to traffic or an access issue, physical access issue. Or it would get cycled to the individual department heads to deal with it. So there is an internal mechanism by which the public communication is received and disseminated. But specifically for accessibility concerns, I think it's probably
maybe it's something might come out in our accessibility planning process, but I think there's something in the legislation about municipalities having a process in place to identify accessibility barriers and then a process on identifying how they've dealt with them. So maybe through the planning, that plan process, we can tweak our municipal processes to make sure we're meeting the requirements. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's all for me. Thanks.
Anyone else want to speak?
Just for some of the feedback, because you'll see the ones I've had, the one in Sidney here. Again, going from a person who doesn't understand how local government works and where you go and who you speak to. We don't know who the engineers are or what the engineers do. We don't know we know who our counselors are, but we don't know anybody else. So it's kind of mind-boggling to know the best way to address these things. And sometimes when you do send in an issue that you don't hear back from anybody. So then you don't know what your next recourse is. So I think having that accessibility one specifically, it deals with the accessibility. It doesn't get lost with other things that can happen to, again, to somebody who is just out in the community, who just knows they've got a problem, but they really don't know where to go. They know who their mayor is and they know who their counselors are, but other than that, we don't know. So I think it'll be very helpful with the plan.
And speaking to that point, Charlene, I'd just like to clarify, and Mr. Humble, you can help me with this. For the members of the committee, the best way for us to bring forward, if we see something small, is to come to our council liaisons or the council liaison for that municipality.
Yeah, that's certainly one mechanism. Absolutely. I mean, the other is going through contacting staff directly. I mean, the default staff is usually engineering, the engineering department. And but I mean, you can call a general office line, you can indicate what your concern is, and they'll direct you to the right staff person, right, to ask about a particular issue. But certainly you can go through council. But I mean, it may be as easy as picking up the phone and just asking who you should speak to or who you should send an email to regarding a particular issue. And I know that typically is the process for Sidney, and that works well. And staff always try to respond to those kinds of concerns or inquiries.
Councillor O'Keefe, and then Councillor Aidan, sorry, Greg.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, staff willing to do that. I guess what I'm wondering is that, like, say with the example with Charlene's, you know, I think it was a parking issue. Probably, like, sometimes staff can explain these things away very easily, rather than coming to me, because I don't know. And the accessibility form, my sense is that those get kind of followed up fairly quickly. And it also, if members put it on the accessibility form, then it's a way of us tracking the you know, whatever the issues and how they're resolved. So is there maybe a preference one way or the other? Or?
So the accessibility form is a more recent mechanism.
Yeah.
That's been established for the town. So absolutely, that's probably now the preferred, that's the preferred course of action in terms of dealing with it. I know previously, prior to the accessibility form, again, it would be either an email to administration or to a particular department, et cetera. But with the accessibility form now, yeah, I would say that's probably the easiest. And again, staff will be responding to those when we get those kinds of inquiries or concerns raised.
Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Chair. Not delving into the mechanics, but I would sort of probably echo Mr. Humble's comment about picking up the phone first and then just reaching out to staff. I will then ask through you to our parliamentarian or a parliamentarian here, just about the mechanism for referrals or for agenda items. My understanding was that anything that was to come on here had to come through with councils of the 3 local governments on how that was. So then to your comment before about how do we get items to be talked about, so I'll just maybe ask through Ms. Gorman just about the technical mechanics of that.
Well, there's a number of items where SPAAC has been but kind of issued some responsibility in their terms of reference from each of the councils, and those terms of reference have been agreed to. So I think where those are elements that fit in that mandate, I think that's why you're seeing something come directly here. At a past meeting, there was a comment made and then a motion made to work on some referral guidelines as well in terms of what kind of scope and scale of projects should come from each council for the comments of this group. Realizing that after the accessibility plan, we're kind of in a phase 2 of SPAAC, and what kind of what's going to be the kind of momentum and role of SPAAC to make sure that those plans are implemented and hold the municipalities to account. I would say, you know, if Sidney feels that and I think it's part of the mandated Accessibility Act requirements to have public feedback related specifically to accessibility, and in that way, I think the emails here fit in that mandate. But yes, you are a creature of, even though you are a mandated committee, you are a creature of each of the councils. So in that regard, they just said I receive, whether that's independently here first, getting comments or reviewing things, or whether that's coming through the council if they wish you to provide feedback informally, even as well, given that it's only every 2 months, and then more formally.
Very good. Yeah. Any other questions, comments about the feedback from the town of Sidney? No? Okay. One thing that I would like,
I don't want to speak of returns, but because there is legislation about feedback, I don't know if he wants to speak to that, so that we're not, apologies for speaking over. But because the Accessible British Columbia Act does require a mechanism for public feedback on the accessibility plan itself, what a number of entities do is on the page where they're posting the publication of the accessibility plan, so each municipality will have a published version of the plan. We would then have typically an email, a phone line, basically wherever you would normally receive feedback that somebody on staff would manage, understanding that the commentary filtering through that is going to be related to accessibility. And then that feedback is required to be reported. The reason I'm bringing that up is because it's a really effective triage mechanism. If you force, and can't force people to, but if you point them to, in order to provide feedback on accessibility, they have to go to the page where the plan is. they may see that you've already made a commitment to an issue that they were planning to identify, which means then they can go, oh, they're on it. Okay, that's, thought and care is being given, and that may troubleshoot the issue right there. And then furthermore, if they feel that their concerns are still not being addressed, they can submit that feedback. I think there's a temptation to get the traction through the phone call, but the email version is also written feedback, which is really helpful to the municipalities in the preparation of their next plans. So it's a form of consultation that is ongoing, which means that in 3 years, when you have to publish the next plan, you can say, we have heard from the town, from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Here's the log of feedback. And then it can also be managed and say, 20% of people that phoned in, it was about traffic safety and parking versus 1% of people were attending to this issue. Okay, what's their bandwidth? What's their budget? So what are we prioritizing? So in terms of forward thinking about how that feedback is handled, I think dedicated accessibility channels, because they need to exist anyway, according to the accessible PC legislation, really helps with that triaging. And I echo the idea of, if you don't know who to talk to, if it's an accessibility issue, put it in the accessibility roster and let staff triage from there. So it takes the guesswork, I think, and the fear out of them, like contacting the right person and the runaround and the pass the buck. So I hope that I'm speaking out of turn and providing kind of what's going to need to occur according to legislation anyway, and how it might be used to everyone's benefit. If that makes sense.
Thank you very much. That's it for the agenda today. Something that I'd just like to put in people's minds as an agenda item that I'll likely bring forward at the September meeting. November is Accessible Parking Awareness Month. We didn't do a whole lot on it last year. It'd be great if we could put some thought to it and maybe help the districts with some communications or something like that. See what we can do to support them in supporting Accessible Parking Awareness Month. And we'll have to start keeping a calendar of some of these different awareness days, months, whatnot, and just see which ones we have are appropriate for us to support. With that, I'd like,
If I can, Mr. Chair, just again, I know Sandy would reiterate this if she was here, but yeah, I know there's a new format with respect to the agendas and either reports or verbal reports coming forward. Just provide her an indication of what you want to bring forward on the agenda. If it's a verbal report, that's great. Just the subject matter. Written report, just provide her the content, and it'll make its way on the next agenda.
thank you very much. And as we close, I'd like to thank once again the support that we've had from North Saanich for the last year, and the support that we're getting from Sidney now for these meetings and that, but also the support that we've had from Central Saanich and the relationship that we're building with our local governments. And like Charlene brought forward earlier, we're really seeing some progress. And I'd like to thank everyone for everyone's hard work. With that,
So in regards to the next meeting,
right,
we need to do anything about that now, or is that just an FYI that Sandy's gonna change?
Yeah, I think that's just notice at this point. There are some challenges in September with many of the local officials being late to DCM.
Oh, right.
So that's right. And we also want a fair bit, enough time that you can review the plan once we receive it, as well as incorporate that feedback. So the corporate officers, I'll volunteer my colleagues, will be reaching out with some testing some time. My work for the committee, but we will be reaching out on that topic. And hopefully let us know.
Thank you very much. Could I get a motion to adjourn before everyone gets up? Froome and Pettinger, all in favor? Any opposed? All right, thank you.